Hi, I'm Lauren Kemp,
And I'm Bridget Price.
and this is Entrepreneurs in Progress. So we did it. We are on episode 7.
Yay!
Yay. When I came to Bridget with this idea to do a podcast, it started out as a 7-episode mini-series. We have finally reached our goal, which is very exciting, and we're going to keep going. We just launched last week, and they've gotten a lot of great feedback, and really appreciate the people who have reached out and said really nice things. So thank you. So for today, we're going to discuss comparisons and how we as entrepreneurs tend to fall into the trap of comparing our journeys. It's a very easy trap, but we have learned and are still learning how to avoid comparing ourselves to others. So, Bridget, comparison is human nature, right? We naturally compare ourselves to others. Why do you think that is?
I believe it's reinforced in our formative years. We grow up, we attend school, we participate in extracurriculars that constantly rank us. We're either first, second, or third place. And really, for what it's worth, it's how we measure ourselves to determine if we're on track. Just generally as a society, it helps us measure our strength and our weaknesses and where we need to improve. So, like you said, it's very natural to compare ourselves. And I think that we haven't figured out really where to draw the line. And when I think about comparing ourselves, we do it again from birth, right? They take our measurements at the hospital. They rank us in terms of projected growth and cognitive ability, and it just constantly evolves. And we really don't know when to stop comparing ourselves, at least to a point where it, breaches into being destructive.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you touch on how we, this is reinforced throughout our formative years. I think this is especially true for athletes in particular. We grow up playing sports, and it is, first place or second in a long line of losers. There's only first place, and you got to be the best, and you got to train hard, work hard, and all that. And I think, people who tend to be more competitive definitely compare themselves more. At least that's my hypothesis, that people who are more competitive, who may have grown up playing sports, are harder on themselves and compare themselves more than maybe someone who is less competitive, doesn't really care about ranks and such, but just wants to go out and do their thing.
Yeah, I think it also is for those who value education or really concerned about academic performance. Some people have the goal of being valedictorian of their high school, right? And so they're constantly checking their rank against others. They're also comparing where they fall with regard to test scores. We've all seen it. You're waiting to see the smartest kid's response to a returned test to see if they did well or didn't do well. And that was the gauge, that was the curve of whether or not you did well. And so, yeah, I think that there are people who are competitive, whether it's athletes or those just from an education standpoint, where you're really constantly trying to strive to be the best. So you're constantly comparing yourself to others to make sure that you're leveling up.
And this is what happens in the entrepreneur world too. We compare ourselves not only to other businesses, but to other entrepreneurs, regardless of where that business is or that entrepreneur is on their journey. And it can be very detrimental to, our well-being and the progress that we make in our own business and lives. So with that in mind, when is it okay to compare ourselves in business and with other entrepreneurs?
I think when you are deciding to become an entrepreneur or start your own business, you obviously want to draw inspiration, right? You want to do your research, you want to do your homework, and you want to get an understanding of where others are in your industry, in your sector, and help guide you with whatever you need to do to get going or get started. With regard to comparisons, I think it's important to factor in maybe their starting point or any outside help that they've received or where they started versus where they are now, just so you can understand how long it took them to get there and if you could potentially be on the right track. And this is more than comparing one individual or one entrepreneur. You probably want to make sure you compare a handful of people just to get some type of anecdotal information that can help you measure, and develop a timeline on how or fast or soon you should get some things accomplished.
I really like how you brought up comparing yourself to a group of people or a group of businesses or an industry, because that's, benchmarking, which is a form of comparison. And I didn't even think about that before. And benchmarking feels a lot less personal because it's not a one-to-one comparison. It's the aggregate, it doesn't feel as harmful to put yourself up against a benchmark. Like, it sucks if you still don't reach that benchmark, but it doesn't feel as personal as when you're directly comparing yourself to someone else. So, looking at the industry, looking at a group is a more healthy way, I guess, to compare yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe you can benchmark yourself against other people who aren't directly in your industry, right? Maybe they have an offering or service that isn't reflected in your business model at all, but you can learn from them and again gauge some information that could be useful for you. And having that as a collective, as you mentioned, really allows you to not compare yourself one-on-one, but really allows you to get a better understanding of what you're facing and what you should be looking for as you embark on this journey.
It's a great way to learn from others. You can also use it as a learning opportunity to look at businesses and people you admire and try to emulate and do what they do and see what's working for their business. And like you said, you can take inspiration from anywhere. It doesn't have to be within your industry.
Absolutely. And I believe you asked us earlier, why do we compare ourselves? I don't think it's just natural. It is, but I also think that we're constantly looking for something to strive for, right? And so that could address our competitive nature depending on who we are, but we have personal goals that we want to achieve. And sometimes someone has set out and say I want to set the, record score, or I want to break this record, whatever the case may be. And they set this personal goal for them to achieve. And that comparison is really to drive their personal growth as opposed to directly competing with that individual, if that makes sense.
So
a lot of times people don't even realize you're competing with them or you're comparing yourself to them. Because it's intrinsic, right? You're trying to achieve something for yourself and they are completely unaware.
You're going about your life.
Right.
What is happening? I hear it in comments sometimes from people, or, there are times where you're like, oh, I had no idea we were competing, or vice versa, where you're secretly competing with someone else. And it
I didn't realize
happen.
it for a while. Yeah. Even my younger brother had said some comments to me about things, and, I realized he was competing with me. I had no idea. I'm like, oh, it's not a competition for me. You're my little brother. I want you to win regardless.
Yeah.
So, but it is interesting to hear that feedback, or, for what it's worth, get the sense that someone has thought enough about you to compare themselves to you and want to outdo you or outperform you in some form. And again, even though they are thinking about you as that benchmark, they are thinking about you as a person to beat. It has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with them. And again, the personal goals that they set out to achieve.
Yeah.
There are exceptions. There are people who intentionally want to beat other people. That can be their motivation, but we're not really talking about those today.
And when we talk about comparison in, this form, it's the more of the negative side of comparison. It's not like the benchmarking and the inspiration and the learning from others. And I feel like it's very common. It's very natural for a lot of people to have this more negative side of comparison. And it really, you hear that quote, comparison is the thief of joy. And I believe it's so true. We've talked about ideas where it has prevented us from starting businesses because we've researched our idea and we see someone else who's already further along and we're comparing ourselves. We're like, oh, okay, I'm not going to go down that road. So it can be such a toxic thing if you don't know how to cope with it or deal with it. Right.
It can be. And I think you bring up a very valid point a lot of times we are comparing ourselves for that growth, right? So we know where we need to be. However, that can quickly shift towards a negative feeling. You compare yourself constantly to others and where you think you should be, and you're right. Comparison is the thief of joy. And if you're not careful, you can get into this pit of despair trying to measure up in your mind, to what these others are doing without always knowing their backstory. And I think that's an interesting question to pose when we're thinking about comparing ourselves or benchmarking ourselves with regard to success and what we need to achieve. Do we ever know enough to really compare and rely on that comparison to grow ourselves or our business?
I would say no. I would say you never have the full story. So that's something to keep in mind. Optics aren't everything. Just because a business has a nice office and many employees or high revenue, whatever the case may be, it's not the whole story.
Right.
And I remember when I started out with Cozy Cactus, and there are times where I would get so down because I'd be looking at these other brands. I'd be like, wow, they're doing so great. There's no way I could ever get to that place. But, you're an entrepreneur and you just eventually brush it off and keep trying after you throw yourself the pity party. But, I would stop following some of those businesses, not because I didn't love them, but because it just hurt too much to see how far behind I was, and it wasn't good for my mental health. And then once, you're in a better space, then I would, refollow them and whatnot. But I think that comparison in the negative side is tough for entrepreneurs, because I don't think I'm the only one who, compares yourself to somebody else who's further along in their journey. Again, you don't know if they had an audience when they launched, or you don't know if they had investors that they knew. You just don't know what the whole backstory is. And we've talked about this with entrepreneur stories in general, how you hear all the success stories, and sometimes you hear a little bit of the struggles and hardships, but I feel like you really do miss out on those little details that can sometimes make or break, a business, or that is the difference between, still being in progress and being a success.
Right. No, I totally agree. We don't ever know enough because we weren't there. And we have to remember the information that a lot of entrepreneurs put out about themselves, or that we have access to, is what they want us to have access to. So we don't know about their capital struggles. We don't know about the late nights and the early mornings and the challenges that they've had to face to keep their business afloat. We see a beautiful product, service offering, logo, website, some vanity metrics from time to time, but we don't see the day in and day out. And so if we don't, if we aren't mindful of that, it's easy for us to spin this comparison into something negative and, ultimately get down on ourselves and believe that we're not worthy of the same success. And I believe the comparisons, unfortunately, can stunt a lot of entrepreneurs, right? They get into a self-loathing, a pity party, and sometimes it's hard to shake, depending on what's happening in your business, right? The worst time to compare yourselves is when you are feeling really terrible about your business. Sometimes you have to take a moment, recalibrate your mindset. And then if you tell yourself you're going to get over a certain challenge or hurdle, and then launch into the comparisons.
I want to talk about vanity metrics you brought up for a sec, because I think that whenever you come across a vanity metric, you need to really examine them. You need to look and see, is there any context behind this vanity metric? And I went through this exercise with Brian actually recently, because, I had seen someone post about they just got their sales commission today and they got another commission the previous day. And they're like, oh, this is so amazing. And that's great. First of all, that's great if it is just as straightforward and awesome, and celebrate, what's the context? One, sales is hard. So you know what? They earned it. There's a reason salespeople get paid the most, the closest to the money. If they bring in X amount of dollars, they deserve X amount of dollars back.
Absolutely.
So one, remembering, okay, yeah, sales is hard. Like, that's awesome. But two, you don't know how long the sales cycle is. Like,
Right.
the sales cycle could be 6 months. With Brian,
It usually is.
Yeah, when you're working with government, it could be a year before you get that giant commission check, and that is absolutely something to be celebrated. But I think it's when people post vanity metrics to kind of come off like, oh, this is always how it is. That's where it's a little problematic, but that's why we need to examine vanity metrics and kind of take a step back and, realize, hey, that's awesome that you're being successful. I know it's really hard, especially in sales, but also it's not the full story. It's never the full picture. It's the same with revenue. And I know we'll talk about this when we get to the finance one, but revenue is not the same as profit, and profit is not the same as what you take home. Right?
No, it's not.
I still think about how Salesforce, wildly successful. I think there's like a 17-year spread where they quote unquote made zero profit, but they were just growing like crazy and buying other businesses. So even those numbers, like, oh, we made zero profit. It's like, okay, but you're still wildly killing it.
Yeah, that's the same with Microsoft and Xbox. The churn, the month over churn was way more than what they were able to generate in revenue. And they projected how long it would take. It was years, right? But you're absolutely right. It's revenue and profit are not the same thing. Sales, all of that, those are completely different things. And you're right, we have to re-examine vanity metrics. We're approaching, after 3 years in business, we're approaching $1 million in gross revenue. So we're super excited about that. But then we were looking at the numbers like, hold up, ain't no way we done made $1 million,
Yeah,
because it's not in this house. But yeah, it's one of those things where we could go and share that information, and someone on the outside looking in might say, oh my God, they're killing it. They're, they're millionaires. No, that's not what that means. I'm going to tell you now. And I always, for me, I think it's super important to keep it real with people about this journey, because we've seen the vanity metrics, we've seen the numbers, we've seen everything kind of thrown at you. And it's discouraging to the extent of oh my God, I don't think I'll ever reach that goal. Or I don't, how the heck did they do that? I'm way in over my head. And that's just not the case. Even if you watch shows like Shark Tank, you have these entrepreneurs who go in looking for a deal despite their performance or how much money they're making, because something about what's going on is not sustainable and they need more support. So I think that's always important to know when comparing yourself or benchmarking yourself to others. We won't know the full story, and I would almost take most vanity metrics with a grain of salt. You got to unravel those numbers. Those numbers sometimes don't always add up or make sense.
Yeah.
So.
I would love to give another example. I'm looking at our numbers for Q1 this year, and we have 300% growth from Q1 of last year, which is wonderful. But our expenses have also gone up astronomically since last year. And we are not really making that. It was kind of sad because I'm looking at the numbers. I'm like, we're bringing in more revenue, but we're actually not taking home that much more than if it were just me and Brian on our own, because we have an employee. But that's the point of, we're trying to grow a business. We're not taking the salary that we want right now. And our expenses have gone up along with our revenue. So we're not really making as much. We're not making more profit than we were, but we're investing in our business. We're anticipating that it will pay off, that we will eventually make more because we are investing in our employee, we're investing in our processes, we're looking to scale the business beyond just me and Brian, because there's a cap there with just two of us. So that's just another way to look at those vanity metrics. And we're proud of the accomplishments and where we are compared to last year. We are so happy, but also it is not the whole picture. It's not the whole story.
Absolutely. We didn't start paying ourselves literally until last October. So we kept reinvesting in the business as a lot of you guys know, Marcus was working full time, and we were kind of just subsiding off of that in savings, and we weren't paying ourselves. And, it took our bookkeeper to be like, you guys are doing a great job. You should start paying yourselves, because ultimately, if you don't, it'll start feeling like you're doing this for nothing. So we've started paying ourselves. Again, it's not even what we feel we should pay ourselves.
Yeah.
Nowhere near that, right? At all. But enough for us to feel comfortable enough to pay ourselves and say, okay, we can still grow the business. But it took us 3 years to pay ourselves. You know what I mean? We launched in October of 2017, and we didn't start paying ourselves until October 2020.
Wow.
And for some businesses, that's just kind of the nature. If you're building a business while you're still working full time, you're trying to grow your side hustle to be your main hustle, it takes some time. And as an entrepreneur now, knowing all of the kind of intricacies and nuances, I still support and will applaud those who have reached certain milestones, right? Because 300% growth, year over year is amazing, or even from quarter to quarter, right?
Yeah.
Because it shows that you are growing, and it shows the work and dedication you put into it. We can always know that, I think as an entrepreneur, you start to recognize the difference of those who are sharing good news to share good news and say, hey, this is what we accomplished, versus those who are feeding into that culture of, look at me, I did this, and this is how it's always been. It's like, real ones recognize game. Like, we know what it is.
And it's because of that, I avoid, sharing some of those numbers. Like, I'm always cognizant of what accomplishment do I want to share, because I don't want to be out of context. I don't want to throw out a vanity metric for the sake of wanting to look good. I do want to share the good, the bad, the reality. So yeah, it's always tough to strike that balance. But you're right. You can tell when someone is not striking that balance if they're always sharing, positive metric after positive metric, but never really saying the bad side. And maybe there are some exceptions where a business is taking off and doing well, and there haven't been any downsides yet.
Yeah.
I think that happens.
I don't think there are
No, you don't think there are?
Not even, even if they're killing it money wise, there's other problems, right? There's partnership issues,
More money, more problems.
Exactly. It's like, oh, I know what Notorious was talking about after all these years. I see why people want to escape and just live on a farm somewhere and not have to deal with this shit. But yeah, no, there's always something, because it's the entrepreneur journey is so hard. It's worth it, but hard. There are so many unforeseen things you've never considered that will continuously throw a curveball at you. Like, oh my God, I didn't expect that, But yeah, I think that game recognizes game. We know when things ain't what it is. But even knowing that, we still fall victim to holy shit, that person's doing X, Y, Z. And oh my God, and I think that really just speaks to where we are in our journey sometimes. We're in progress still, we have not made it. We're getting there. But a lot of times seeing those numbers or those successes or those wins can tap a nerve and speak to some of our vulnerabilities that we're experiencing at any given moment. So
absolutely. It's hard to also strike that balance of, you want to be happy for others' success. We all can be successful. We all can win together. And,
yep.
I think it's like you said, depends on where you are in the journey, where you are mentally, whether or not they are part of hustle and grind culture, or they're truly, not everyone's going to be an open book. So
no,
it's hard. And I would like to land on the side of being more supportive than not.
Yep.
But that's what that's why we're talking about comparison. It's very hard. And you never have the whole story. You never have the full context. So the reason that we're talking about, critically examining some of these things is part of just coping with it, to make it a little bit easier, to be a little less hard on yourself. So Bridget, what are some ways that you deal with comparison?
For me, I have learned how to try to compartmentalize those feelings. So before, I would launch into something or an idea without a lot of research on whoever was killing it in the game because I didn't want to feel jealous or be discouraged about pursuing an idea. So I kind of went in, did research around the business, did research about kind of some of my tactical approaches, but I stopped short of really examining people who were doing what I was seeking out to do. Since then, I've learned that the best of the best learn from other people. You know, you have mentors, you have imaginary friends in your head who you think once you make it, you're going to be kicking it with them. But no, I decided that you have to become a pupil, right? I don't know everything. I am far from knowing everything. And it's important for me to put myself in a position where I learn and soak in as much information as possible versus going at it alone. So in terms of coping with comparisons now, I do use comparisons as a motivator for me. Not necessarily to supersede, but really put myself in the same room with these people, right? I can be on the same plane with these individuals, and I know I'm more than capable of doing that. And so I cope with comparisons with also being fully aware. Now that I have skin in the game, I recognize that all that glitters ain't gold, and there are other pieces to the puzzle that I'm missing, and I'm okay with. I don't need to know the full story. I know enough to know what I see staring back at me on social media or whatever is not the full story.
That's great. I think that having that confidence does make it easier, and like you said, understanding that you don't have the whole story, and that's okay. You don't necessarily need the whole story to know that, okay, don't take this at face value. I think that, back when I was, working on Cozy Cactus, where I didn't have that confidence, it was a lot harder to be like, oh, I'm just going to look up to these people and learn from them. I did not feel like I belonged in that room with them. I didn't have that confidence yet. It was still getting to that point where I am now. So I think that for people who feel that way and are dealing with comparison, the things that I tried to tell myself and remember was, realizing that other people do this too. Try not to beat yourself up so much because you're not the only one who deals with comparison. It's a very natural human thing to deal with. And then I think I mentioned earlier, social media, you said social media is the information that we want to share with others, and it usually paints us in the best light. People are only sharing what they want you to see. I actually follow Jamila Jamil. She's really great, and she had made a point about if there's an account that makes you feel bad about yourself, mute or unfollow it. Just for, you don't need that triggering you. And of course, I know it's from our own insecurity, but if you need to take a break from looking at those brands or those people that we know it's a me problem. I know it's not them. They're doing great or they're killing it, and that's awesome. I admire them. I look up to them, but it's still making me feel bad about myself. You can take a break from that. Just mute it. Come back to it when you're in a better mental state, because when your mental health is better, you're less likely to fall into that negative spiral and comparison trap. So when you're feeling good, when you're feeling confident, I found that I really don't care how other people are doing. I'm super happy for them if they're doing great. So I think taking care of your mental health really helps with dealing with comparison.
I agree with that. And one of the ways I think young entrepreneurs can figure out how to cope with comparison, even older entrepreneurs, is if you find someone who is doing what you want to set out to do, killing it, try to see if they can talk to you or have a conversation with you. Even if they don't become your mentor, just even getting some piece of advice is really helpful. It's encouraging, and it can also assist with that mind shift. We all feel it, but trust and believe, another thing that isn't commonly shared when we look at, I guess, the entrepreneurial landscape and what's out there, is there's enough room for everybody. There's more than enough room. And sometimes certain pieces of information or friends or people in your groups might lead you to think otherwise. There's so much bread out there to eat, to go around, to share. And so I think if you adopt that mindset, it'll be easier to cope with comparisons. Like I said, it's natural. We're going to do it from time to time. But in order to avoid that pitfall of despair, really just keep in mind that you can have access to these people. DM them, slide in their DMs. Do what you gotta do. Connect with them on LinkedIn. People are more than willing to share information from a coach trainee type of situation, right? And a lot of times people have gotten to a space where they're like, man, if I had this information, I would want to share it with somebody. Or and so that has really helped us, I believe, as we've embarked on this journey.
That's such a good point, because when I think about, people who have reached out to me asking about, certain things, I love helping others. I love sharing and responding to them. But I myself never do that. I never reach out to others because of fear, or just like, why would they want to talk to me, or they don't have the time, all those, insecurities start coming up. But when I think about my reaction when people reach out to me, I love it. It's great. I love being able to help others. So why can't I imagine that whoever I'm reaching out to won't have a similar, reaction, or at least some of the people if you reach out to them? And that when you brought that up, I'm wondering, can you give me a time where you've done that, where you've reached out, or you and Marcus have reached out, and how did that play out, and how have you learned specifically from doing this?
Yeah, actually, I'm like you, Lauren. I'm not the best at reaching out, even though I should. And I admire people from afar, and I feel like I should make it known that I respect what they're doing and want some advice. I've reached out professionally with regard to career when I was working in corporate America. But literally what Marcus did with this cleaning business was kind of go under the mentorship of another person who kind of developed a blueprint. And he's asked questions. There's Facebook groups out there that's super supportive, and really just have built kind of a small network of people who he constantly goes to for support and advice. And they do the same. It's like it's now evolved into this piggybacking of, hey, I have this idea, or hey, I have this problem. What have you done, or what have you heard others do? And it's been super insightful and helpful. And even having those small circles and groups, when you think about people who you're comparing yourself to, they have tidbits or insights that you may not know about this particular person. And that also helps you understand the full picture. Oh yeah, this person's doing great, but they also ran into this problem, because they might know them more intimately, or whatever the case may be. And so opening yourself up does allow you to combat those negative feelings around comparisons. So, but I think that's a goal I'm going to make for myself this year, Lauren, is to identify maybe a handful of the people who I admire from afar and ask for some guidance or help and some support. Because I'll say it again, I don't know it all, not even close. And I want to be able to lean in and get that and solicit advice from people who I respect and want to learn from. But like yourself, I've had people reach out to me, and I'm like, me? Who am I? But it feels good. And again, I'm more than willing to help and assist and offer any advice that I've learned along the way.
So when you're reaching out to people, because my first thought now is, well, what if they're like in the same market, but a competitor, like competitors aren't going to want to help you, on your journey to take over their share of the market. So who do you reach out to? How do you know when it's okay? Because I guess that's another thing that holds you back too as entrepreneurs, is like, you want to learn from others, but usually from people in your industry, and then that's your competitors. So
yeah, I learned the opposite, quite honestly. I've learned that those who are really killing it in their field or industry, if you come and solicit help from them, they know that there is more than enough to go around. So they don't fear someone encroaching on their territory or in their space, and they're more than willing to help out. There will always be exceptions. You'll have a couple of people who are like, no, I'm good, I'm not going to help you type of thing. Or they might be a little snakish. But for the most part, people who understand what's available and what's out there, they feel more than comfortable with helping and providing some sound advice. Because I think we mentioned this in the last episode, ultimately it does come down to executing. How many times have we given advice to our friends or colleagues and we knew that they weren't going to take that advice and actually do anything with it? Unfortunately, it's the same in business sometimes too, right? You get advice and you sit on it, right? And you don't know how to exactly move with this piece of information. And so it just stays there until something forces you to revisit that conversation.
Yeah, that's something that I want to do moving forward too, is I guess reach out more to people and entrepreneurs. I don't know. I'm more of an introvert, so it's harder for me to even reach out to people I know who I have good rapport with, you know.
Right.
You feel like you're bothering someone still. At least that's how I feel. So I definitely want to push out of that comfort zone like I did with, you know, you and this reach out and talk to more people about it. It's like, how do you even start? How do you even begin? I guess it's just kind of like any relationship where you just say hello and you ask and you talk and you see if it goes anywhere.
Yeah, hey, I have a quick question. You know, I'm doing XYZ. I see that you're, you know, obviously flattery gets you pretty far. So you flatter that person, or if you just are keeping it real with them and telling them that, hey, you really motivated me or inspired me and I'm thinking about doing this, that people will be receptive, right? I also think you bring up really good, valid point about asking, how do you go about approaching somebody? A couple years ago, I approached a friend who was a business finance advisor to a lot of people in Hollywood. We went to middle school together, and I reached out to him trying to help my friend whose kids are in the industry, and they had an idea and wanted to pitch something, and I knew he had access or resources, but we haven't talked in years. And so I slid him a message on Facebook. Now, despite kind of our relationship and how we became friends way back when in our early teens, our relationship is different now. So even though I'm aware that we go way back, based on where they are in their lives now, if I'm trying to approach someone with a professional question or ask, is Facebook messaging the right platform to do that? Are they at a level where they would be receptive or take me seriously with this request, right? And I think you have to be aware of that. I think some people are more, you know, laid back and they're more okay with that form of communication, but others are very like, hey, send me an email, reach out to this person, find out the right way to get in contact with me, then I'll take you seriously, which I think LinkedIn is great for. Obviously, you're there for a purpose, and LinkedIn is for those business and, you know, working relationships. But definitely evaluate what's the best way to reach out to somebody. You might get lucky with Instagram. You might get lucky with Facebook or TikTok or whatever the case may be. But really think about how this person might want to be approached. I also think for those like ourselves who are willing to entertain other people and give them pieces of advice or help them or point them in the right direction, we should also make it known where we should be contacted. How can someone reach out to me if they have a question? And I think that is just as equally as important as those who are looking for the help to find out how to, you know, best get in contact with somebody.
So how should people reach out to you, Bridget?
On the spot. I respond to DMs. I don't mind. I respond to DMs. I respond to emails. I respond to LinkedIn messages. I'll be honest. I sometimes am delayed with my responses. Forgive me. I'm working on that as well. But no, I am pretty laid back. So if you can reach me through any of those platforms, I'm here. How about you, Lauren?
Oh, same. Definitely more laid back, casual when it comes to reaching out. Like if it's something that needs longer discussion, then I'll be like, hey, email me at my business, you know, email. But DMs are fine.
Yeah. I used to do like a small test, like to see if people were serious, to avoid wasting my time. Like, hey, email me.
Yeah.
That type of thing. I have gotten a bit more lax with that because I don't like testing people when they don't know that they are doing
being tested.
A test.
Yeah. Surprise, pop quiz.
I think that's a little unfair, and I think that's a little archaic sometimes, given how, you know, how far we've come and kind of what our etiquette is nowadays. And people have a lot of shit going on. And I'm more forgiving towards that than oh, you said you were going to call me at 1 o'clock and it's 1:05 and you're not serious. And, I just don't subscribe to that because life happens. And I do look for consistency, but I mean, if you're a few minutes late, I'm not tripping.
So moving on, can you talk to me a bit about Mamba mentality?
Yeah. So for me, because I'm an athlete and I love basketball, when Kobe Bryant died last year, I took it really, really hard. I started watching a lot of Kobe interviews and understanding Kobe's mentality. And he mentioned that for him, despite how hard he worked and everything that he sacrificed, he figured out or learned how to enjoy the journey, enjoying the 5 a.m. workouts, enjoying, the ice baths and all the crazy stuff that he went through. And I was thinking about kind of all of my accomplishments or achievements that I've done. And I've asked myself, did I really enjoy the journey to that success? Because once I've achieved what I thought I was looking for, whether it was a higher paying job or a specific position or working at a company that I always dreamed of working at, that achievement seemed very short lived. And then I was already looking for my next milestone. So I feel like I did all this work and now I'm not as happy with what the outcome was as I thought I would be. Kind of just disenchanted a little bit. So he really speaks about that, enjoying the journey or process, because depending on what you do in your life, you're spending a lot of time dedicating your time and energy to this thing, whether it's business, sports, whatever. So how do you, once you reach your goal of $1 million, now what's next? Did you enjoy it? Was it, And so for me, I think with regard to comparisons, I think everyone's journey is different and you have to figure out a way to enjoy your journey. Whether for me, sometimes that's taking a minute to meditate and do some breathing exercises when I'm having a really stressful day or when I'm questioning myself, like, why the hell am I doing this again? Just recentering myself and enjoying some of the difficult tasks, because once you make it, again, for most people, it's not always sustained. And so I also think when you do enjoy the journey, it probably will help you sustain that happiness that you feel once you've reached a certain milestone.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian says I always like to move the goalpost. And so it's like, you're never going to enjoy the journey if you're always looking towards the next thing, or sometimes you can do both, but it's definitely been something that I am intentional about to try to enjoy. So some of the ways that I help remind myself to enjoy the journey is I also look back on, where we were 6 months, 1 year ago, and remind myself, like, wow, we used to be way back over here. Look at where we are at now. It's practicing that gratitude. You enjoy the journey more. And, you got to try and shift your perspective, because so often we live in the future or we live in the past, and it's always a struggle to try to be in the present and feel gratitude for where you are currently, how far you've come. It's hard to remember that, there was a time before where you were at now or where you are now.
Yeah.
And I think it's just also remembering, with the comparison to other entrepreneurs, very rarely are entrepreneurs overnight successes. Most entrepreneurs don't get it right on the first try. And oftentimes you don't see all the years of work that go into building and running a business. Like when you talk about how you guys didn't pay yourselves from Made Easy for 3 years. Like,
yeah, it's
doing so well now. And we talked about how, like, even that's not even the whole story. Like, even approaching $1 million in revenue is still not quite like, it's not the same as profit and take home.
It's not $1 million.
Yeah, it's not $1 million. Yeah. And you didn't pay yourself for 3 years. Like,
yeah. And that's extreme, right? It's usually like a 2-year waiting period. But there's some businesses, people don't pay themselves for 5-10 years, right? I mean, we weren't going to do that because we'd been like, what the hell? But I mean, we were so scared of taking money from the business because we wanted to make sure we had a business. We wanted to have it sustain ourselves. And yeah, but you're right. It's so many years of hard work, and we're not Duck McScrooge, diving in piles of money.
You mean Scrooge McDuck?
Oh, sorry, that wrong. Sorry,
Duck
Scrooge
McScrooge.
McDuck. Scratch that. We're not.
No, I'm keeping that.
Oh, that's hilarious. Dr. Scrooge. Scrooge McDuck. Y'all know what I was talking about. We're not diving in piles of money.
No.
Swimming and, laughing sinisterly, like, about having millions of dollars. That's just not the situation. But yeah, I mean, we are still in the thick of it, right? We're able to overcome that 2-year mark, right? Like most businesses fail within 2 years. Now we got to make sure we make it to that 5-year mark, right? And then go from there. And for some people, that's not always the goal. They don't always aim to go 5 years. Some people have a really short end game. Really skilled entrepreneurs are like, yeah, 2-3 years, sell it, I'm out, that type of thing. But yeah, you don't see all the work, all the tears, the arguments, the disagreements, the frustration that goes into business. But you also don't see the good parts, like when we're happy when money comes in, like when we got paid, or the sighs of relief, when a contract goes through, or, that type of thing. So there's so many nuances that, again, you don't always have access to, and that's something to keep in mind. But I love the whole looking back, because we look back at our numbers like, oh my God, I remember when we were so happy to hit $10,000 a month. That was our goal. And then literally when we hit 10,000 a month, we freaking zoomed past that. Like, oh my gosh, we're at like 20,000 a month. And then we kind of stayed there for a minute and then zoomed, so it's just been this touch and go. But then I always recall what we were thinking or feeling in those moments. And it's so different than what we feel or how we feel now. So it's always interesting to kind of replay that and run that back.
And reminding people that these numbers sound awesome, because they are. 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 a month is awesome. Is still not the whole story. So, like,
nope. Like I said, we were not getting paid. Okay.
Yeah. Like, I try to bring that up, not to diminish anyone's success, because those are awesome numbers. It's for the people who start comparing themselves. Just a reminder, you're hearing a metric again, but yeah, challenge that.
There's more to the story. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, with comparison and with, trying not to compare yourself with others and the journey, it is easier said than done. Everyone's journey is different. Just be okay that, like, it's human nature, and there are ways that you can cope with it in a healthy way and start to shift your mindset towards, the more positive aspects around, like, benchmarking and, taking the things you like from other businesses and entrepreneurs and incorporating that in your own business and processes.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, open the dialogue. I think that's super important. Talking to others, befriending people. Before COVID hit, we had plans. I had personal plans of growing my entrepreneurial base and working with women who are also on this journey and supporting one another, because I feel like that's super important. And I was starting to feel like I was losing touch with other people who couldn't relate to what I was going through. My friends inquired about my business and what was going on, but I can only actually share the vanity metrics, right? Because they didn't want to hear that I had to work Sunday, or they don't want to hear, some of the pains. So sometimes we also feel like we can only share good news than no news at all, or bad news, because there's a lack of understanding. But sometimes when you open up your circles, you can share the good, bad, and the ugly, and it's all received, it's all welcomed, and you feel normal. You don't feel alone in that process.
And when it goes to finding your tribe and growing your network, start with one person. Start small. That is, as an introvert, that is overwhelming to me sometimes, to think like, oh my gosh, how am I going to find all these people? How am I going to build all these relationships? And I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to start with one. I'm going to start with Bridget.
Absolutely. Networking events are so
they're draining. Yeah.
Absolutely. So draining. And I feel like networking events should be categorized to a certain extent, because sometimes I remember going to networking events looking to be the person who I can find like a mentor. I need to talk to someone. I need someone to help, evolve me. But then I'd always run into people who are looking for the same thing. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't.
And I think this is a whole separate topic that we will definitely touch upon in another podcast, is networking and finding your tribe, because that is its own beast.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, start with one person and that will turn into two. And, and even if it stays small, at least, again, your feelings are normalized.
Yeah. So thanks, Bridget. Thank you all for listening. Like, share, subscribe, all the things.
And keep an eye out for our next round of episodes. So we made it to episode 7.
Yeah. We're still going.
Happy.
You'll get more.
Thank you, Lauren, for inviting me on this particular journey. I've been enjoying it so much. So,
thanks for doing it with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Until next time, guys.
Alrighty. Bye.
All right. Bye.